Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game news, game design, interviews, stuff, podcast. And we're going to be heavy on the stuff today. There's lots of stuff to talk about, and I'm here, as always, with Teos Abadia. Teos, shall we just dive into news today since there's going to be some big stuff happening?
I mean, maybe we do the news first and then we come back and there is a question that's almost pertinent to this. So, yeah, let's go right into the news.
Okay.
Anything happen, Shawn? Anything at all?
Yeah. The question that you're talking about is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Uh, Found your recount of the Daggerheart experience really interesting. As a mechanics heavy DM player with a similarly minded table, I struggle to see Daggerheart being popular with our regular gaming group. Question: do you think Daggerheart will stand the test of time? Uh, Bonus question: do you think more mechanics forward games like Draw Steel will do a better job of drawing in, no pun intended, the more traditional D&D players? And the news that this brings to mind is Darrington Press just hired two new employees, a couple of up and comers. Let me see if I can pronounce their name: Christopher Perkins and
Mm.
Jeremy Crawford.
Mm.
Uh, you may be familiar with those names as the people that have run D&D for the last 20 years at Wizards. Now, obviously, they haven't run D&D, but they've been a huge part of the game design, game presentation, all of it. So this comes to us via the LA Times. They've reported that both Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford have been hired by Critical Role's division, Darrington Press. Darrington Press is, of course, the creator of Daggerheart, which we'll be talking more about later. Darrington Press followed with this official statement. Exciting news. Our Darrington Press team has grown, adding Chris Perkins as our creative director and Jeremy Crawford as game director.
Mm.
We're thrilled to welcome both Chris and Jeremy. Their experience in game design and storytelling, honed through decades of experience working together on tabletop games such as Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars role-playing game, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and Blue Rose. We're enormous fans of their work and are honored to welcome them to our team. At Darrington Press, they'll be developing novel game concepts as well as expanding upon the games we've released so far. So, Teos, what you got?
I mean, I'm stunned. I heard the news this morning and I'd even heard some like minor rumors. I had heard that the two of them had moved to California, and I'm like, both of them? Could they be doing something together? Maybe they're doing like Hollywood stuff or something. Like my brain just could not go to the obvious place. Yeah, there are a number of things that just like I could have seen maybe the tea leaves, but my brain just could not comprehend it, and I'm still having trouble comprehending it because this is so big. I think this is up there with Gygax leaving TSR and TSR being sold, like one of the potentially biggest stories to ever happen in our hobby, because Critical Role is really the only company that could possibly compete with Dungeons and Dragons, because like Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast, Critical Role is not just a role-playing game company. They are an entertainment company, right?
Mm-hmm.
They sell novels, they sell t-shirts and other merch, they sell Amazon TV shows, right? That are in their third seasons and coming to fourth,
Right.
and so on. They are enormous and span cross media, cross industry. They have all these Hollywood contacts. They have their own production studios, all of these capabilities. And so adding the two biggest names in D&D that we've had over the last, I don't know how many years, a lot, at least 15, that's enormous to me.
Mm-hmm. And I am not shocked, and I am not putting this up there with the top
Okay.
three stories that have come out of role playing games, in the history of role playing games.
Why? I want to hear
But
that.
it's big. It's big.
Yeah.
It is. It is big because Chris and Jeremy are not the biggest names in D&D for the last 10, 20 years. the biggest name in D&D in the last 10, 20 years, runs Darrington Press, and his name is Matthew Mercer, right? And that's why
Hmm.
when people leave Wizards of the Coast as a D&D creator, there's generally nowhere up to go from there as a game creator, right?
Yeah.
I've seen people go into video games. I've seen people go into publishing. I've seen people go into other fields entirely
Yeah.
because that's sort of as high as you can get as a game designer because it's owned by a company that can pay you a salary commensurate with the talent that it takes to do this job.
Yeah.
With the popularization of D&D, with some sweet Amazon slash YouTube slash whatever else money coming in, now we are starting to see for the first time, I would say, a company not being able to compete with Hasbro,
Sure.
but a company that can compete with the D&D part of Wizards of the Coast
Hmm.
in terms of revenue,
Yeah.
in terms of the ability, not even revenue, but the ability to make waves and sign deals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
Mhm.
and that's why I wouldn't be surprised if when Chris and Jeremy announced Chris's retirement and Jeremy is leaving, like every game company known to man probably reached out and said, "Hey, if you're still interested in working, let us know. If you're going to do freelance, let us know." Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they, if they knew this opportunity was coming, could just sort of laugh. Or if they didn't know this opportunity was coming, say, we'll see. Right? Let me decide what I'm going to do. But this is more of a lateral move than anyone ever before leaving Wizards of the Coast could expect.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it's interesting there are quotes in the article in the LA Times and on the Darrington Press website announcement um, where Chris Perkins talks about the chance to work with Jeremy and the brilliant folks at
mhm,
Critical Role on things that have a lasting positive impact on the world. And Crawford talks about how he and Chris had talked about Chris's retirement for years, so his approaching departure was long on my mind. When we sent the new D&D rulebooks to the printer last year, I felt it was time to explore a new chapter for myself. I loved the game and its team, but 18 years is a long time. I was ready for a new adventure. The chapter that we've now opened feels like coming home, resuming work with Chris and returning to Southern California.
mhm,
And they talked about the deep relationship they've had with Critical Role over the last decade, interacting with them, hanging out with them, collaborating, right? They've had all of these various interactions both at the design level and as people hanging out at the same events, right? And
mhm.
running games for one another. um, Perkins talked about the strength and diversity. This is part of a joint email response they sent to follow-up questions. Diverse creators and diverse games help to create an industry that feels more inviting to everyone. The more people we welcome into the proverbial tent, the more powerful the industry becomes. And Perkins always also said, second, we think it's important for the industry to acknowledge that friendly introductory experiences are important for onboarding new generations of gamers. Third, we hope the industry never loses the joy of play. So many of us became game designers, game masters, and players because of the spark of joy we felt when we first tried a role playing game. Let's continue to fan that spark into a flame that fills everything we do with infectious delight. It's a very
Mhm.
Perkins statement.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, it's funny that they talk about this introductory experience and that being important with the introduction of a new 5e. Uh, well, the box set, we'll see, assuming that they worked on that,
Right.
what that does to be an introduction to new players.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great for them. I think it's definitely great for Darrington Press. I think it's great for the industry as a whole. And I still I still go back to an old quote that somebody at Wizards said that we at Wizards don't want to make stars, right? We don't want to make our game designers into stars. And then suddenly Chris Perkins was running
Hack Inc.
Acquisitions Incorporated games and sort of became a star.
Yeah.
I still remember when he stopped and Jeremy Crawford took over. I was standing in line waiting to get it into the PAX South
Mm.
San Antonio, Texas convention hall, and somebody standing in front of me complaining that Chris had left and this dude named Jeremy was going to take over, and how terrible it was and how awful it was going to be that Chris left, and this new person obviously is not going to be any better than Chris. And I just stood and I just was laughing and shaking my head. And I tried not to make myself notice, but finally the guy looked at me and I'm like, you have no idea. You're going to get in there and you're going to fall in love. This is the guy
Yeah.
who Chris Perkins calls his DM,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So and obviously Jeremy wowed the crowds of AC Inc. fans with his performances
Yeah.
and games.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's I always looked for Wizards to expand the game, expand the hobby, and they are.
Yeah.
They are doing so, uh, maybe not on purpose, but they're doing so by allowing these things to happen. And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. On our Discord, folks were asking, whether this will be seen as a positive move by gamers, and it's hard to say. I'm sure there'll be some folks who say, wait, what? Like, how could they leave my game and go to a different game? Um, but I think the majority of people will be excited by this announcement. I think this will bring a lot of energy to Daggerheart, where you might have thought, well, Critical Role had Candela Obscura. That didn't change the world. Why should Daggerheart? And this might get people a little more to think, well, I may want to look at this game now. If there are these kinds of names that I've followed before and looked up to attached to this becomes more exciting and more serious to me.
Which is hilarious considering that neither of them worked on this game.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah, do you even like it?
shows you the mindset of human beings in general,
Yeah.
which is I wasn't excited about it. Now I am, for no reason other than these names are now attached to it, which is the trap of celebrity.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they won't contribute to it going forward, or won't make other games, or won't make 5e products.
Yeah, that could be too.
With Darrington Press.
Though I would find that honestly very boring if that was what they were there to do. Well, I suspect they're there to do way more than that.
I'm sure it's not. Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not, but there's no reason not to, because the Wizards of the Coast licenses can Creative Commons. Yeah. So it is a very good license to be able to be used to make that, as opposed to other licenses we've seen recently, which might not be quite as strong. And which, if such a license came from Wizards of the Coast, may be decried as horrible and corporate and not good for the industry. But if it comes from Darrington Press, then it's fine.
Well, we talked about that license, and it's been fun to follow conversation to this online. And someone said to me today, there's no way that Critical Role doesn't know what it's doing when it comes to this license, right? This is a company that has made millions using D&D. Mm-hmm. They know the importance of a license that allows or doesn't allow these kinds of interactions better than anybody. And I thought that was a very sharp point, right? Like, they do know how licenses can create impact and why you may want to retain control, even while they themselves can be so greatly benefiting from the D&D license. But I'm excited to see what they do. I suspect it'll take some time. You and I have often asked ourselves, back when we reviewed Daggerheart in its playtest form, is this an RPG from Critical Role Darrington Press, or is it the Critical Role RPG? Mm-hmm. And if it isn't, might we see that sometime? And so maybe they'll be part of that equation as well. Or maybe they will just make lots of games and there is no one Critical Role game. We'll have to see. It'll be interesting.
Or what would probably be the short-term best gain for Darrington Press is to have them running games like they do for AC Inc. and like Chris did for Dice Camera Action, to see really great game masters, not dungeon masters, really great game masters running your game.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
I mean, they
can
already have
does
Matt
Matt
Mercer,
have
but
the
now they can
I mean,
have more
right, does Matt have
flexibility
the
and
time to
yeah,
do it
right.
doing other
Hmm.
things? Now they have two more people who are known entities, known quantities that are great game masters, great storytellers, great creators to be able to pick up any slack that there might have been.
Just I can imagine right now Jerry at Penny Arcade going, "Wait a minute, what happened?
Yeah.
Do we have to switch to this Daggerheart game now? Like, what's happening?"
Yeah. Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. Uh,
Mhm.
Also interesting is the what we thought was going to be our big news this week is that Jess Lanzillo, who had been vice president of the D&D franchise at Wizards of the Coast for the last year, and also with the company for the last 8 years, is leaving Wizards of the Coast and the D&D team. On LinkedIn, Jess wrote, I have made the totally reasonable decision to leave a job where I got paid to argue about whether fictional lizard people can have tails. And of course they can, says Jess. My trajectory at Wizards has been wonderfully unhinged, leading creative during an absolutely wild ride for Magic the Gathering, doing business things as chief of staff, and finally getting to be the VP of the Dungeons and Dragons franchise, which is either the best job title ever invented or proof that late stage capitalism has finally achieved absolute absurdity. Take that, liberal arts naysayers. Uh, and so there's more. We have a link that you can read. But Jess was only there in that position for maybe a little over a year, if that.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
thought she
so,
joined in May. It's possible. Some I think Indian World said
yeah,
February. I'm not sure if it's hard because they didn't super announce when the switchover occurred.
right.
But it is a surprising. I mean, people can always leave, as we talked about before, for just whatever reasons. You know, I miss my family. I want to move. You know, partner, whatever. All kinds of the kids, the schools. You know, it's just any number of things can cause things. But there have been a number of departures at Wizards, and especially at the upper levels. Um, you know what Dan Rawson is doing, and you know various VP shuffles. It just it feels like this is a thing, right? Like there's been a lot of motion at the top, which erodes your stability and
Yeah.
possibly exposes issues in how happy people are there. So it's hard to
Yeah. I
say. Jess is
mean,
very positive.
right. When we see the firing and hiring and layoff and leaving of the game design team,
Hmm.
you know, it's hard to fathom being in a position like that and then losing it, and how many people have switched, and it feels like it's happening all the time. Well, the C-suite and VP shuffle is about 4 times as fast as
Yeah.
with the game design team, it feels like. Because as I read off last week or a couple weeks ago, maybe here or maybe it was on the Lorecast, but they have a team of game designers now who have many of them have been either in their positions at Wizards or in game design for a while.
Mm.
10 years, 15 years, 10 years, 20 years. Uh, so they're pretty stable there, I think,
Mm.
by all metrics, even with Chris and Jeremy leaving.
Hmm.
So having
Mm.
this sort of transition, makes me wonder a lot. And it also makes me wonder if those two job openings we reported on last week may have been a precursor to this, right? The game design lead or whatever it was called, and then the what was it? The ecosystem, the
Yeah.
D&D
Yeah.
ecosystem
I forget the
director.
titles, but essentially Chris and
Yeah.
Jeremy. I mean, I suspect those were already, like we talked about, probably already filled and planned, but
Mhm.
you know, companies struggle to make these kinds of moves, right? When someone
Mhm.
announces that they're leaving, like we saw this when the Wizards of the Coast president departed, right? When she left, and before being replaced by the John Hoyt, is that his
Height,
name? Height.
height, height, height. Yeah.
Um, there was a time before that position could be filled, right? Wizards had to
Yeah.
scramble to figure that out. And then it takes time for a person to learn the ropes, to figure out what's going on, who are the people you can count on, what are the main threads that you're trying to pull on, how to organize people behind those goals, and any time to try to build some sort of metrics, right? And Jess, I think, really made a name for herself on the Magic the Gathering side, straightening up a shop that had gone in various directions. And that's going to make you some friends and some enemies, but, somebody has to do that hard work. She didn't have that time at the D&D team. Yeah. She probably was just barely getting started on how things operate, and now she's gone. And now everybody has to adjust to that, both above and below. That is tough. Organizations can handle that, but they can handle it better when the rest of the group is stable. And as I hear what you say about staff being there a good amount of time, but there are also a lot of changes, right? We've seen all the Adam Lees and all the, we could rattle off the names of people who have left and joined. And so I'd say it's not a particularly stable team in my view. And yeah.
Yeah. Again, I would say that the game design team, they've just been through creating a new edition.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are stable, but sadly, they are the ones with the least power.
Sure.
To make decisions, right? It's the VPs and the Cs that are the ones that make these decisions, and the directors of. And so I think they're stable, but that doesn't really matter.
Well, and I'll say this: if an issue came along and Chris Perkins or Jeremy Crawford wanted to champion it, people inside of Wizards would have listened to them. Right? Doesn't mean they want to take that on. There are always costs to doing that in an organization like Wizards, but they have a star power that everybody understands exists. Folks on the team there now, great as they are, do not have that same threat capability, whatever way to get people above you to perhaps listen. And the more that your team members change, right? So now whoever Jess understood and knew and all that she had learned, that's gone. Now somebody else has to come in, and the team has to try to convince them all over again. Hey, actually listen to us. Oh, and by the way, we don't have Jeremy or Chris to speak for us, and that's harder.
Yeah, it is. That is definitely true, and it's such a weird industry. There is nothing like it, and it's just one of the weirdest things where the thing that you're making, this game, is like the least profitable part of everything, right? It's all about the licensing. It's all about the sales. It's all about all of these other things. But the game is also the root of it.
Yeah.
And so people, I think, business leaders come in and they've succeeded in all of these other places because there's a playbook you follow. And when you come into this, the playbook goes out the window, and it's really tough to make it work in a way that not only the players want, but that the investors and those higher level C-suite folks demand.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that. We had that conversation a while ago that took place where I forget who was particularly, might have been the then Wizards of the Coast president, talked about the need to monetize D&D.
Right.
And then we've seen D&D Beyond turn off the ability to purchase individual parts of books. Right. It's just, like those things. And it's because the answers are always complicated. It's so easy to say something on a investor call. And that's the point of those kinds of calls. But the truth on the ground is always so much more complicated.
And we've still yet to see D&D become a $1 billion brand.
It's still far from that, yeah.
And may not see that for many, many years or ever. But we have some other news, so we'll get to that. More Daggerheart news. Additional languages are coming. Daggerheart will be getting translated into the core set in print and digital in Brazilian Portuguese, French, German, Italian, and Spanish. And they listed the groups or individuals that would be doing this. I don't even want to try to pronounce them, but they're in our show notes. So all of those languages have groups that are set up and ready to do those translations if they haven't already.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And that's the kind of work that sounds easy, but you can just, if you start thinking through what it takes to accomplish this, it's significant work, right? And it also shows the size of Daggerheart and the scope they're able to take on to so quickly go from having the book in English to these other languages. That's impressive.
Since we talked last week about the Psion, we wanted to point out that Mike Mearls on his Patreon blog examined the choices that the playtest Scion work through as a player or provide as a player. He creates a diagram for each action type for a third level Scion with the Psykinetic subclass. And it sort of goes through a list of options where a different color will represent a structural choice. Where a green box will show an at-will option. A red box will show like a short rest regained power.
Mm-hmm.
Black ones would be a long rest regained power. So you can see the choices and then the structure of it. And this reminded me so much of fourth edition,
Yes.
right? With the cards having the different colors for at
Yeah.
will, encounter, or daily
And
powers.
Mike even chose the same colors, right? Which is,
Right.
of course, on purpose.
Right, of course. And it's just it's not the only way to look
Mm-hmm.
at game design, but it's an interesting way to look at it for the information that it can deliver to you. So if you're a visual learner, if you're a visual interpreter, you can sort of see, do I have all red? Do I have all blue? Do I have all black? And what does that mean in terms of the choices that players are making with these characters?
Yeah. And Mike in his breakdown says that what's interesting when he breaks down the Scion from the playtest, he finds that overall what you're doing is, oh, I'm a spellcaster. Well, okay, that's fine. You know, that's a great way to have a character run, but there's nothing there to feel different from the others. So what is it that's carrying that weight? And it's the bonus action carrying, as he says, quote, the entire weight of making the class feel distinct. And he's not a big fan of bonus actions. And he says it's this part that says, okay, with my bonus action, I'm doing my defense mode or my attack mode. I'm using telekinetic propel with telekinetic techniques. And so this is a lot to put on there. But he thinks, you know, the main part that I found interesting here is just this idea of mapping out this way to show where it is that your class flavor comes from in your story and the types of actions you're using. It's really neat.
So there's a link for that in our show notes. EN Publishing had an interesting look at Kickstarter's pre-launch versus totally funded, or the total funded
Mm-hmm.
for the Kickstarter. What did you learn about in this, Teos?
It's a really nice article by Morris. He shares, he says he didn't have all the data for this except for 12 of their 60 crowdfunded campaigns. So he notes that, you know, this is just a sliver of our data that we could pull together and look at this. And every Kickstarter is different. He says, you know, all the $1 million campaigns you find out there historically have an average pledge level in excess of $100, right? So a lot of their own Ian World campaigns are much smaller with a much smaller pledge level. So it can vary, is what he's saying. But based on the data that he has, there is a nice correlation he sees based on the number of pre-launch followers and then how much you end up raising. So he says, we need about 1,000 pre-launch followers for a $100,000 campaign, 2,000 pre-launch followers for a 175,000 campaign, and 6,000 pre-launch in order to approach that $1 million mark. And so he sees this correlation and he gives you a bunch of graphs you can look at. And he says that it's interesting when he looks at the data, like these are not all the same people across their different Kickstarters. They said they get a similar conversion rate, though, kind of regardless of who is backing it. And so it's it's interesting and worth looking at. And if you are planning Kickstarter campaigns, this kind of becomes another thing that you can look at of what your pre-launch followers might lead to once your campaign goes live.
In our creator corner this week, we're going to take a little bit of a look at Patreon. So if you're a creator on Patreon or plan to be a creator on Patreon, listen up, because Patreon is going to be raising its rates. The percentage that it takes from new creators will be going from 8% to 10% starting on August 4th. This also consolidates their Pro, which is 8%, and their Premium, which is 12%, into the new standard 10% plan. Teos, thoughts?
You know, it's hard because they make it sound like a price increase the same way that, the price of, I don't know, bubble gum or a book might go up over time because we haven't raised our rates in 6 years. But here, this is a percentage of what you generate that they are taking. And so in theory, that's not the same, right?
Right.
If you're a current publisher or current Patreon, you currently have Patreon, you don't see your rates increase, and you'll see a few things go down. But so it's fine, you're not impacted. And this is the same as it was 6 years ago. If you got in on that time, you were grandfathered in, and that's great. But it makes it harder for new folks. Patreon can be a good source of income. For a very few, it can be a huge source of income. But it's just usually, for most people, I think, a part of the large struggle to be creative. And so this makes that struggle, 3% harder on the Patreon side. And there's no two ways around that.
Mm-hmm. So that's our news. We're going to loop back now to our questions, and we're going to answer that original question now that we have new information. So Chris G 8989 via YouTube had asked the question about mechanics with Daggerheart, whether or not we think Daggerheart will stand the test of time, and do more mechanics forward games like Draw Steel do a better job of drawing more traditional D&D players. Now, this I answered before this news came out. So first of all, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Daggerheart over the next couple of episodes. So we'll answer these questions and more later. It's the stand the test of time question that's most interesting to me. And for me, it's more about company size and market share than it's about game design. D&D has obviously stood the test of time by evolving, including getting moved along or lifting up or being lifted up by the clones that have come from it. So, when you say has D&D stood the test of time, I'm including Pathfinder in that. I'm including Shadow Dark in that. I'm including all of these games that, while the mechanics may be slightly different or even very different, it still has the same sort of game loop. It still has the same feel as D&D. Another game that stood the test of time is Call of Cthulhu, because they keep making the game. It has a history, it has a genre, and it has a play that is distinct from D&D. So, and when you see a list of like the most popular games played on this platform, it's D&D by a long shot. It's D&D clones in there, and then it's Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Other games have they stood the test of time? It depends on what you mean by that. Right? Have you mean like sold so much that they're noteworthy? No. Have they sold enough that they can keep putting out an edition every 5 years and have a few people who play? Then yes, there are other games that can stand the test of time. Here's where I gotta stop. I gotta let you talk. Go.
Oh no! You gave me a big tease there. Like now I don't know what you're gonna say.
So Draw Steel for me will likely draw more traditional D&D players, because when you play that game, or at least the version I played, it felt like D&D. Did it have way different mechanics? Yes. But in the long run, you were still doing the thing that you do for D&D. Daggerheart for me felt a little different. it felt a little bit more powered by the apocalypse than it did D&D. Now that's me understanding the difference between those two games. So for me, and from what I've seen from folks who have been traditional D&D players who tried Daggerheart, was what Chris said in the email, which is, I don't think my players are going to get into it. Does that change now? Does that change when the two biggest faces of the design of D&D are on your team? Does that draw the attention? Does that give you the grace that other people would not give it just through play, because there's that tangible or intangible draw from having someone famous working on it or working with the company? And I think, yes, for right or wrong, I think that has changed now.
I think there are a number of things at work. One is that there are a lot of game designers. I think our hobby had a period of time where people were creating interesting role-playing games, right? Shadowrun and the original Call of Cthulhu and all this. And they're all variations of concepts, but they weren't necessarily great. And I'm particularly looking at you, Shadowrun. We might love the world, but you play and you have fun, but can you admire its mechanics? Not necessarily. I think that we have then gone through a whole indie era that really brainstormed a lot. And we're now at this point in our hobby where a lot of really great ideas can come together with a foundation of actual play, actual great design behind them. And that really creates better, more stable RPGs that can stand the test of time, not because they're popular or an interesting concept, but because they are fundamentally great games. The way that Settlers of Catan, or now Catan, was innovative when it came out, but also just so stable as a fun, great game that it's still huge now. In a way, Monopoly isn't, right? We all know. Doesn't mean Monopoly can't be enduring because it came out back then, but we know that today's board games like Wingspan or any of these can have these just it's easier for them to be stable and get played if they can get attention and all those things that, life is life, business is business. But they have that foundation that can enable them to stick around. And I'd say Draw Steel, Daggerheart, both have this sort of intelligence behind them in their design. That doesn't mean they're perfect. That doesn't mean they weren't rushed to print on this part or that part of the chapter or whatever. Life is life. But they're fundamentally really fun experiences. And then on top of that, they are both positioned with really smart people in the company and with the ability to reach audiences. And that can make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, that is one thing that I want to add, was that these new games that we're seeing made, they're feats of engineering that we would be hard pressed to. We can nitpick them, which we will in our main segment, right? But they are just at the foundation better than a lot of predecessors who have tried to come in using popularity as a selling point, trying to use something as a selling point other than being a solid game that is fun to play. Now, the fun to play, we need that. That's where we'll see if it stands the test of time.
Right. And I think part of that, and I want to just quickly say Shadow Dark, another game, right, that such a stable basis, as we discussed on our show, that it just can carry forward when it is also fun and popular and all of that, because it's just a great game, fundamentally, right? With Daggerheart and Draw Steel, I think they both, in different ways, and we're going to talk about one of them, but they are difficult for your average RPG player to make that transition to them. There are some aspects of them that are different enough that they could be barriers to being adopted and standing the test of time. But this is the benefit of the world we live in, with YouTube and streaming and big recognizable names that can help you see it. Like I did this video with, 5-room dungeon, learn to play Daggerheart. And I've heard people say, this is the first game I'll ever play. This is the first RPG I'll ever DM. Now that I've seen your video, I finally get it, right? And that's what we live in, this different era where this really is also coming together. And both of these companies, MCDM and Daring to Press Critical Role, know how to press those kinds of angles to make it successful.
All right. Well, that is our news and single question segment.